Thanks for joining us. This is Omni View, episode 29, for April 7th, 2026. We bring you balanced news perspectives, cutting through the noise so you can form your own conclusions. Today's stories are dominated by a dangerous escalation in the Middle East, but we'll also look at significant developments in Australia, European markets, a high-profile celebrity lawsuit, and a quiet milestone in space exploration. We'll examine each story from multiple angles, left, right, center, and international, without endorsing any single narrative. Let's begin with the story that is moving markets and diplomacy alike. President Trump has issued a firm Tuesday deadline for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face American strikes on key Iranian infrastructure, including power plants and bridges. Oil prices have now risen for a third consecutive day as traders price in the heightened risk of disrupted crude shipments through the narrow waterway that carries roughly one-fifth of global oil supply. Diplomatic efforts mediated by officials from Pakistan, Egypt, and Turkey appear to be losing momentum, and Trump has publicly dismissed a 10-point peace proposal from Tehran as insufficient. Meanwhile, Israel has taken the unusual step of issuing direct warnings to Iranian civilians to avoid trains, railway lines, and other potential military targets. The rhetoric has been blunt, with Trump reportedly telling reporters that Iran could be taken out in one night if necessary. From Bloomberg and CNBC, the dominant lens is market mechanics. They report the oil price surge as a textbook reaction to reaffirmed deadlines and escalated rhetoric, highlighting how Brent crude and West Texas Intermediate have climbed amid fears of supply shocks and increased insurance costs for tankers. These outlets emphasize investor risk premiums, volatility indexes, and the potential ripple effects on global inflation and central bank policy. The Guardian, by contrast, frames the story as part of a broader, decades-long Middle East crisis. Its coverage stresses the humanitarian dimension, particularly Israel's civilian warnings, and the urgent need for de-escalation to prevent another regional war that could displace millions and further destabilize an already fragile area. The Daily Mail focuses more colorfully on the tone of Trump's press conference itself, describing it as perhaps the most chaotic ever held, one that invited immediate mockery from critics who likened it to a Saturday Night Live skit. BBC coverage sits somewhere in the middle, underscoring the genuine economic pressure on global oil markets while carefully noting the extraordinary nature of the one-night claim without fully endorsing or dismissing it. What unites nearly all reporting is agreement on a core set of facts. A specific Tuesday deadline has been publicly set, military options have been placed on the table, and back-channel talks are continuing even as public statements grow harsher. Where perspectives diverge is on the wisdom of this approach. Some analysts argue the hard deadline strengthens negotiating leverage by clarifying consequences and forcing Tehran to choose between economic pain and compliance. Others warn it risks wider conflict by boxing in Iranian leadership, potentially triggering miscalculation in a region already primed for escalation. What's interesting here is the complex interplay between public statements and quiet diplomacy. Public ultimatums can rally domestic audiences and signal resolve, yet they can also shrink the room for face-saving compromises that diplomats often need to resolve crises. The question worth considering is how public statements from leaders affect diplomatic efforts behind the scenes, and whether the visible pressure we see is being carefully matched by invisible off-ramps that allow both sides to claim victory. Shifting now from the Persian Gulf to the courtrooms of Australia, where one of the country's most decorated living soldiers finds himself at the center of a grave legal battle. Ben Robert Smith, a former Special Air Service Regiment operator awarded the Victoria Cross for bravery in Afghanistan, has been arrested on allegations of war crimes. He has consistently and strongly denied all wrongdoing. The arrest follows his earlier loss of a landmark defamation lawsuit in which several media outlets successfully defended their reporting that he was involved in the unlawful killing of unarmed civilians during Australia's long military commitment in Afghanistan. That civil case, which lasted years and involved extensive witness testimony, significantly damaged his reputation even though it did not result in criminal charges at the time. The BBC has covered the arrest in straightforward, factual terms, carefully noting Robert Smith's continued denial and the outcome of the prior defamation proceedings. The Guardian has folded the story into its rolling domestic Australian news blog, placing it alongside other national developments and emphasizing that this represents another chapter in Australia's painful national reckoning with its military conduct during the two-decade war in Afghanistan. The Daily Mail has taken a more direct headline approach, stressing that the former Special Forces soldier, once celebrated as a national hero, has now been taken into custody. Coverage across outlets reflects Australia's broader and often uncomfortable examination of its military legacy. Some voices stress the importance of accountability and justice for alleged victims, while others point to Robert Smith's distinguished combat record and question whether the transition from civil findings to criminal charges is entirely fair. What's interesting is the unusual overlap between civil and criminal proceedings in this case. A defamation victory by media defendants has effectively paved the way for prosecutors to pursue criminal charges with a roadmap of evidence already tested in open court. The question worth considering is what the precise relationship is between that earlier defamation case and the current criminal charges, and whether the standards of proof and procedural protections differ enough to produce different outcomes. Meanwhile, even as geopolitical tensions dominate headlines, European markets are displaying a degree of resilience that some traders find surprising. European stocks are expected to open higher on Tuesday despite the Iran deadline, suggesting that at least some investors are either pricing in a last-minute diplomatic resolution or simply rotating into equities they view as temporarily oversold. At the same time, broader risk assets are sending mixed signals. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have slipped further amid the uncertainty, reflecting their sensitivity to any hint of global instability. The dominant driver, by nearly universal agreement, remains the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. CNBC's coverage leans toward short-term equity optimism, reporting that many fund managers appear to be bracing for the deadline while still positioning for a relief rally should tensions ease. Bloomberg paints a slightly more cautious picture, noting that markets are struggling for clear direction and that risk assets, including crypto, are sliding as investors reduce exposure ahead of the ultimatum. These differing emphases, one highlighting pockets of optimism in equities, the other stressing generalized risk aversion, reflect the perennial tension in financial journalism between narratives of resilience and narratives of fragility. What's interesting here is the apparent paradox that stocks can rise even when geopolitical risks appear to be increasing. Markets often look past immediate headlines when they believe central banks stand ready to cushion any blow, or when they sense that political ultimatums contain more theater than imminent military action. The question worth considering is why stocks might rise even when geopolitical risks are increasing, and what that tells us about the difference between perceived risk and priced-in risk. In other news, a high-profile couple finds themselves defending against allegations of workplace misconduct. Radio personality Howard Stern and his wife Beth are facing a lawsuit from a former employee who claims the couple created a hostile work environment leading to her termination. The complaint reportedly details a pattern of behavior the plaintiff describes as demeaning and abusive. At this early stage, coverage has focused primarily on the claims themselves rather than counter-narratives from the Sterns, who have not yet issued a detailed public response. The Daily Mail has given the story prominent treatment, laying out the specific allegations in detail and treating it largely as a celebrity legal matter with the potential to generate significant media attention given Stern's long and often controversial public career. Coverage across outlets reflects a common pattern. Employment disputes involving wealthy, well-known figures tend to attract intense scrutiny, even when similar claims against less famous employers might receive only passing notice. What's interesting is how these cases often become proxies for larger cultural conversations about power, celebrity, and workplace standards that have evolved considerably in recent years. The question worth considering is, what legal thresholds must actually be met to establish a hostile work environment claim under current U.S. law, and how difficult those standards can be to prove in practice. Turning from earthly concerns to the final frontier, NASA has quietly achieved a significant milestone in its Artemis program. The 4 astronauts aboard the latest mission have successfully swung behind the moon and are now heading home after breaking records for the farthest distance traveled from Earth by a crewed spacecraft. The mission also brought humans closer to the lunar surface than any crew since the Apollo era more than 50 years ago. The achievement has been largely celebrated as a technical and exploratory success, marking another step toward NASA's long-term goal of sustained human presence on and around the moon. Bloomberg reported the accomplishment in measured factual terms, highlighting both the new distance record and the record proximity to the lunar surface while framing it within the broader context of renewed international and commercial interest in lunar exploration. Unlike many stories that generate immediate political controversy or market reaction, This one has been covered primarily through the lens of scientific and technological accomplishment. What's interesting is how this mission fits into the longer, sometimes forgotten history of crewed spaceflight. After the excitement of the Apollo landings faded, human exploration beyond low Earth orbit essentially stalled for decades. The current Artemis flights represent a deliberate return to deep space crewed missions, even if they have received less public attention than their 1960s predecessors. The question worth considering is how this mission compares historically to previous lunar flights, not just in technical achievement, but in its role within the larger arc of humanity's relationship with space. To really understand the central story dominating markets and diplomacy today, it's worth stepping back from the day-to-day headlines. Most reporting treats the Tuesday deadline as a simple countdown clock. Either military action or diplomatic breakthrough will follow. What often gets left out is that ultimatums in international relations function primarily as signaling mechanisms inside a much larger, more complex bargaining framework. That framework includes multiple interested parties, incomplete information on all sides, domestic political incentives, and the constant shadow of historical precedent. When a leader issues a public deadline backed by specific threats, they are attempting to alter the other side's assessment of costs, benefits, and probabilities. The targeted nation must weigh the price of compliance against the dangers of resistance while simultaneously judging how credible the threat really is. At the same time, mediators from countries like Pakistan, Egypt, and Turkey are working to construct face-saving off-ramps that allow both sides to step back without appearing weak. History suggests that the most successful ultimatums are those carefully paired with credible exit strategies. Next time you hear about a hard deadline in an international crisis, it's worth asking whether the visible public pressure is being matched by invisible diplomatic off-ramps, and whether domestic audiences on each side are being spoken to as much as the opposing government. Before we go, keep an eye on developments following tomorrow's Tuesday deadline on the Strait of Hormuz. Any movement, whether escalation, compliance, or creative diplomacy, could quickly shift the tone of coverage across outlets and send fresh ripples through energy markets and global capitals alike. That wraps up today's edition of Omni View. Remember, the best informed people read and listen to more than one perspective. If this show helps you do that, consider sharing it with someone who values fair, thoughtful coverage. We'll be back tomorrow with the latest angles on whatever the day brings. Stay curious. This podcast is curated by Patrick, but generated using AI voice synthesis of my voice using ElevenLabs. The primary reason to do this is I unfortunately don't have the time to be consistent with generating all the content, and wanted to focus on creating consistent and regular episodes for all the themes that I enjoy, and I hope others do as well.
Without taking the dive, we went on vacation. We had a nice time. My doomsday